Welcome to Tavern Talks. Get around, travelers. Welcome to Tavern Talks, the video podcast, the talk show where game masters and TTRPG creators from around the world share their secrets, stories, and expertise on crafting the perfect TTRPG sessions. So, in this cozy virtual tavern, we'll be sitting down with expert GMs and TTRPG contributors to swap tales, trade tips, and dive into the art of creating unforgettable TTRPG experience from world building to NPC crafting, from session prep to improvisation. We've got to cover it all. Cover it all. So grab a pint of your favorite virtual ale, pull up a chair, and join the conversation. In this episode, we'll be chatting with Austin Ramsay.
Hello.
And
Thank you for having me on.
I would like to ask your pronoun before I start.
She, her.
Okay, and her journey as a TTRPG content creator. So let's get talking. Who is Austin Ramsay? That's my first question.
I am a tabletop role-playing game designer, best known for Saber. I'm also an actual play creator. I've been doing that for 10 years. And Saber was my first publicly available game, which was made public in 2018. Since then, I have made several other tabletop role-playing games, but Saber remains my big one. For podcasting, I did You Don't Meet in an Inn, which was an actual play podcast about exploring obscure tabletop role-playing games with a rotating cast for 7 years from 2014 to 2021. I've also done Saber the Cenotaph, which is a Saber campaign. And my current project is CalazCon, which is a mega game actual play with 30 players across 6 playgroups.
So have you published anything about it? Because I didn't see that. So are you currently working on that one?
It's been airing since August. We began the production process in August of 2022. Recording started in May of 2023 and then wrapped up in about July of this year, 2024. And so we started publishing episodes in August. There's 2 episodes released a week. And yeah, it's been going well so far, the releases have.
That's nice. So, okay, so I actually want to ask another question about you before we go into the details about your games and mechanics and stuff. So, what inspired you to play TTRPGs? Like, what sparked your interest in it?
Well, when I was a small child, I always liked to come up with games for my friends and I to play, even when we were doing just games of imagination, pretending to be characters, fighting monsters or whatever. I have a tendency to come up with rules and that there's a story my mom likes to tell about me coming inside from playing outside, and I was upset, and she asked me what was wrong, and I said, "None of the other kids are following the rules." And I was like 6 years old. Um, and then when I was about 11, I went to a March break D&D camp at the Royal Ontario Museum. And so we'd play D&D and also be surrounded by museum exhibits and stuff like that. There's nothing quite like making a paladin for the first time and being able to point to a suit of armor and say, "I want that." Um, and so after that, I enjoyed it so much. I wanted to play more, but you know, I had no idea where I would buy that stuff. And being 11 years old, I also didn't have the money to do so. So I recreated it from scratch to the best of my ability and just created my own stuff to fill in the blanks that I couldn't remember. And so that was how I got started. And then I just kept making games for pretty much the rest of my life.
So, what do you keep playing? So, what you really liked about TTRPGs? What you're still playing it, and what you are still creating TTRPG games or TTRPG games?
I like the stories that happen in them. That's the big draw for me. And the rules, they provide guidelines for how those stories might turn out. I really like the fact that in the types of games that I prefer, there are generally 3 parties that have input onto what the story is going to be. There's the GM who often does the world building and preps the plot points and so forth. And then there's the players who play the main characters, of course, and throw some curveballs at the GM. And then there's the dice that throw curveballs at both of the other parties and deciding what does and does not happen. And I think that those 3 parties interacting with each other can create some absolutely wonderful stories together. And that's really what keeps me coming back to the hobby.
Mm-hmm. So, what about your favorite TTRPG system?
That I don't think I have one favorite, but there's definitely a few that, like, have been big inspirations for me in one way or another and that I keep coming back to and thinking about. So those would be Unknown Armies, which is an very unique urban fantasy game, um, that has a very strong grasp of the horror that is within the setting and has mechanics suitable for that. You know, it's more than just sanity being another HP equivalent. And so there's a lot of fallout from that sort of stuff. And the magic in the setting is strongly tied to belief, which is something I really like in a lot of world building. There's Apocalypse World, which
Mhm,
I'm sure many people are familiar with that, considering it, founded not only powered by the apocalypse, but also indirectly forged in the dark and probably some other engines as well, taking inspiration from the idea of partial successes amongst many
mhm,
other things like fiction first gaming.
mhm,
Um, Fate, I really liked as a setting agnostic system. Since you could do anything with it, and the aspect system creates a really fun, mechanical economy for play, and also the way that the uh, skills are built specific to the world you're playing in, something I
mhm,
like. Um, FantasyCraft is sort of my go-to for really mechanically crunchy games. It's a D&D 3rd edition offshoot, and I think that it does a good job addressing a lot of the problems that D&D has while not fixing others. Um, and so I really like it from a design perspective, but after having run a year-long campaign of it a couple years ago, I don't
mhm,
think I'll ever run it again just because I had forgotten just how much work there is involved in the prep and
mhm,
how sometimes the systems, as fun as they are to think about, don't always actually play out that well at the table.
mhm,
Um, and then the last one that I often think about is Spindlewheel, which is a deck of cards. It's that they're they're single-sided, but at the top and the bottom of the card is a different description of the same idea. And in the middle is an evocative image for the cards. Um, I don't have my deck on hand. I should have grabbed it. um, but it's very good because you can create games around it by creating something like a tarot layout board. And so you draw cards from the deck and you interpret what those cards mean within the context of where you drew them into the layout. So, for instance, you might have a layout where there's a slot for a vehicle, and then you draw a card like thorns, for instance, and you interpret what a vehicle of thorns is. And so I really like the how evocative Spindle Wheel can be with its minimalist design, and also how it can really add uh, some pizzazz to other to game ideas.
Mhm. That's nice. So, okay, a couple of favorites. I got it. So, hmm.
Hard to pick one.
So, okay. Well, much easier or much harder question, let's say? Well, do you have any kind of a favorite book of fantasy fiction or science fiction, and why does it resonate with you?
Um, I would say that probably. I mean, I haven't read it in years, so I don't know if it still holds up. But The Black Company by Glenn Cook holds a very strong place in my heart for fantasy fiction.
Mhm.
Um, it's kind of the progenitor of the grim dark fantasy and military fantasy sort of genre. And so I'm a sucker for grim dark stuff. I got introduced to Warhammer 40K in middle school or possibly even younger, and I never quite outgrew it, even if I
Mhm.
outgrew 40K. Um, as for science fiction, um, I don't know if there are any particular books that lodge in my brain quite the same way The Black Company does, even though I generally prefer sci-fi over fantasy. Um, I've been reading the Murderbot Diaries lately, and I've really been enjoying those. And I really like the Expanse series as well.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask about, of course, I'm gonna mainly ask about Beam Saber, but like you got other games as well. But I especially um really want to talk about Beam Saber. But of course, we're gonna talk about the other creations of yours as well. So okay, the Beam Saber. So what inspired you to create this TTRPG system? So why Beam Saber? What's happening in Beam Saber?
So, for those who don't know, Beam Saber is a
Mhm.
Forge in the Dark game about pilots of powerful machines in a war that affects every aspect of life. You're trying to do your part and then get out mentally and physically intact, and hopefully you can help others get out too.
Mm,
Uh, as for what inspired me to create it, it's probably friends at the table. It's probably the shortest answer and probably the most accurate if I'm being honest with myself. Um, I have pretty much always been a fan of mech stuff. Um, it's waxed and waned over the years. Um, and then in July of 2017, I played one session of Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands with some friends. And that just completely reignited my, at the time, slumbering for several years, love of mecha works. Um, and so I started thinking about Friends at the Table because I had started listening to them while they were in the midst of making their counterweight season. And they adapted the Sprawl, which is a cyberpunk powered by the apocalypse game, to their needs of doing a mecha story. And it worked, but it was also a slightly awkward fit. Um, and so I started with how do you make a mecha specific game empowered by the apocalypse? And so that's what I started working with. And then I heard about Blades in the Dark, and specifically, it's mission followed by downtime followed by mission structure. And I really liked the idea of that. I think that there's a lot of games that don't make space for downtime.
mm,
And I think that that's an extremely important thing because aside from the fact that it breaks up the action, it also designates an opportunity for scenes that tend to be awkward in games that don't have a firm downtime designation. Personal scenes between characters, acquiring new gear can sometimes be awkward. Creating new gear is very awkward in some games, unless you have this dedicated space for these things to happen. And so that's why Beam Saber wound up as Forged in the Dark is specifically for downtime and the opportunities that it gives to the players.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. So, okay. That's the inspiration point. So, what makes actually? I really wonder, like, what makes your Beam Saber, your TTRPG system, unique compared to the others on the market with in the same genre, especially. Like we got lots of. I'm not gonna name them, and okay, I'm gonna name them. For example, like the home TTRPG that is on the top list for a while now. You know the name as well. So, and I'm gonna interview with them as well. Let's say I don't know their pronouns, so I'm gonna use them. So I'm going to with them as well. So I'm wondering what's your system's unique part? Because people may wonder it. Yeah.
Um, so Beam Saber is a fiction first game, which is
Mhm,
not alone in that for sure. Armor Stir is comes from a similar vein.
mhm,
Um, and so it focuses on there's an old joke
mm,
amongst fans of the mecha genre when
mm,
talking about uh someone who is less familiar with the genre and then finds one that they finally like. The
mhm,
newbie to the genre will often say about their preferred show, unlike other mecha shows, this one's about the characters. And so someone once actually described in a roundabout way that Beam Saber, unlike other mecha games, is about the characters.
mm,
And I think mechanically, the way that that's represented is with two mechanics in
mm,
particular. The first is the cut loose connection assist loop.
mm,
So in Beam Saber, like some other Forged in the Dark games, you have a resource called stress, which you spend to gain advantages on dice rolls or to activate special abilities, or to prevent bad things from happening to your characters. So, but if you build up too much stress, then you get a permanent scar on your character, which affects how they behave.
mhm,
Um, and if you get too many scars, then your character is permanently removed from play. So you want to prevent a certain amount of stress buildup, or rather, you want to remove stress you've already accrued. And that's where the cut loose activity in downtime comes in for Beam Saber. With Cut Loose, you choose one of the other pilots in your group, in your squad, and you describe how you relieve stress with them. This could be something friendly and casual, like maybe you get some beers together and just hang out.
mhm,
Maybe you go dancing together, or maybe it's a bit more aggressive. Maybe you think that they really screwed up in the last mission. And so you just cut loose by tearing a strip off of them and yelling at them about what is wrong with you. Um, and so then you roll dice and see how much stress you remove. And after you do that, you gain an additional connection with that pilot to represent that you have a better understanding of them. And you write a new belief about them, which, might be like, um, you know, Dave's a really cool guy. I want to make sure he gets out of the war safely, right? And so you now have a stronger understanding of them, which then affects the next mission. Because when you assist a fellow pilot during a mission, It costs an amount of stress equal to the number of connections you have with them. So if you've only got one connection, it only costs you one stress because you're not that emotionally invested in how things turn out for them.
Mm.
But the more stress you spend, the more benefits they get.
Mm.
So spending three stress because you have three connections with someone is a large amount of stress to spend since once you spend nine, then you gain a scar. So that's one third of your available stress. But they also get three benefits. And so, with this stronger connection with them, you spend more stress assisting with them. And then, once you've built up all that stress, then you have to cut loose again once you come back to downtime. And thus, you have the cut loose connection assist loop. And so, that's like one of the things that I'm really proud of with Beam Saber's mechanics and how it's about the pilots. Um, the other major mechanic is the drive system,
Mm.
which came about because I was trying to figure out what determines the kind of epilogue that pilots get in mecha fiction. Because in originally the rules, you accrued money, and then once you had enough money, then you got a retirement of varying levels of comfort. But
Mhm.
that's not really what happens in mecha fiction. Usually, what happens is it's determined by how well the character pursued their own goals.
Mm.
And so that's where the drive mechanic comes in. When you create your character, you say, this is what my character wants to change about the world. And it can be something very big, like, ensuring that one faction is never going to use genetic engineering ever again. Or it could be something very personal, like deciding that you want to make sure that one person, maybe yourself, gets out of the war safely.
Mm.
And so during play, when you take steps towards doing that, you make progress on your drive clocks. And you have two of those, and each of them is 4 ticks. And so you can gain 1 tick per mission. And you can also advance them during downtime by completing long term projects, which might be something like setting up a secret bank account and filling it full of money for the person who's trying to retire, right? And once you complete a long term project, you add another tick. And so if you filled up one drive clock, then you can spend that for a mechanical benefit, like a guaranteed six or negating a consequence or a number of other things. If you spend two drive clocks, you can change the circumstances of a single person.
Mm.
Three drive clocks lets you change the circumstances of an entire squad. And four drive clocks lets you change the circumstances of an entire faction, which is made up of multiple squads, right? So, like changing a whole nation. The thing is each character only has two drive clocks. So if you want to change a squad or a faction, you have to convince another pilot to give up their hard earned drive clocks in pursuit of your goal instead of theirs.
Mm. Mhm. So, okay, I got the main mechanics stuff off. So, how did you balance the simplicity? Of course, that's a whole different question, but how did you balance the simplicity for new players with that for like experienced players in the system? Because it just came up to my mind that like the system may be kind of frustrating for the new players, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, Beam Saber is a big book. It's 450 pages, and I will admit that a lot of people do find it intimidating upon first glance. Um, but I think that the core mechanic is fairly simple, and that gives new players an in onto actually getting into play, right? You roll you roll between 1 and usually 4 dice. You can get more depending upon certain abilities and so forth. But usually you're rolling that many dice. You take the highest die, and then, that determines if you fail and get a consequence, if you succeed and get a consequence, or if you succeed without a consequence, depending upon the die result. It doesn't change that mechanic from the source of Blades in the Dark and the Forged in the Dark engine. So I think that lets in a lot of new players who are unsure about that. And so they're able to build up familiarity with the other mechanics as they go. Plus, a lot of the mechanics are very narratively integrated, like the
Mhm.
drive clock, right? You choose a drive during character creation, and at character creation, you don't need to know how the drive mechanics work. You just need to know this is what my character wants to change about the world, right? And so you will try and pursue that narratively through play by doing, whatever your character would reasonably do. And that will build up those drive ticks, which you can then eventually spend once you have a better idea of how the mechanics work. I wouldn't say that it is like a game for someone who is completely new to tabletop role playing games, unless they have, friends who they're playing with to guide them through the game. Um, but I don't think that it is the most, mechanically complex game that's out there by any stretch of the imagination. There are certainly more crunchy games, even though if you, dig deep into Beam Saber, there's crunch to be found.
Hmm. So, like, do you have any challenging mechanic that you have? I mean, what was the most challenging mechanic that you developed, and how did you overcome it?
The most challenging mechanic. Um, do you mean to create or for players to
Create.
use? To create? Um, Probably, um, I think the drive system was actually probably the most complicated mechanic to create. Um, in the sense that I sort of only it's kind of an odd story. I only can take partial responsibility for its creation. Because like I said earlier, it came out of this question of what determines the epilogue of characters in mecha fiction. And I have a Discord server for my games. At the time, specifically, it was for Beam Saber because I didn't have any other games. And so I asked that in the rules discussion channel, what determines that? Because it was something I had been pondering. Um, and so there was a little bit of discussion, but then I went to bed. Because it was kind of late when I asked the question. And when I woke up in the morning, I found that a group of people had continued the conversation throughout the night and hammered out a pretty solid backbone of what drives are. Um, so particular shout outs to Austin Walker, Kavita Puduri, and Zachary Tinscher, who were sort of like the three main people discussing that question in the chat while I was asleep. And I woke up and it was like, oh, uh, I guess that question is like mostly answered. I have some other like things I need to finalize with it to make it fit the rest of the game, but like the general concept was there. Um, as for like things particular that I I mean, tabletop role playing game design is not something anyone does on their own, no matter how much they insist that they do. It is a genre, it is a form of art that is constantly built upon the shoulders of those who came before you, right? Like Beam Saber is a Forged in the Dark game, which comes from Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark is considered by its creator a Powered by the Apocalypse game, which comes from Apocalypse World. Apocalypse World has its own set of games that inspired its creation, right? You can follow the lineage all the way back, if you were so inclined, to Kriegspiel and the Prussian army in the 1800s playing war games. And I'm sure they took inspiration from something as well. Um, but that's all to say that, the idea that I think I probably uh cr- closely create or most closely was me creating something on my own is the quirks system for vehicles. Because in Beam Saber, everyone gets a vehicle. Doesn't I specifically choose that word because not everyone wants to have a bipedal mech. Some people want to have a jet or a big truck or a tank or a Fiat 500, whatever. Um, and so every vehicle has what are called quirks. And you start off with four of them, and you can enhance your vehicle up to eight. And you can spend these to um, basically do awesome stuff with your vehicle. It's the moment in the anime where the camera focuses on one particular part of your vehicle before you do something awesome. Because quirks are generally speaking have two parts, a negative thing and a positive thing, such as roaring engine or overheating boosters. And so you describe how you take advantage of that particular detail of your vehicle, and then that gives you a bonus to whatever roll you do next. And then you can't use that quirk again for the rest of the mission. Um, and so that was solving a problem of how to make vehicles feel more differentiated between each other. Like what makes one bipedal giant robot different from another bipedal giant robot? It's the equipment and it's the quirks. And so quirks was a solution to how to make them feel different while still providing a resource that needs to be spent to get bonuses.
Mhm. Hmm. Okay. So I also wonder that, hmm, like, are there any kind of, or how much, if there is, flexibility do your system give to GMs or like to create their own worlds or their own settings while using your system? Like, is it deeply attached to your setting, or I can put it anywhere I want by using your mechanics or using your book?
So I have never once, I don't think in my entire life, used the setting that comes inside of a game book.
This is doing that.
Yeah. Um, I just enjoy the world building that goes into it too much. I worry too much about like, am I getting someone else's world wrong if I'm playing in it? So Beam Saber was created setting agnostic. And there's an extensive section about how to create your own world and plan your own campaign in Beam Saber. It has everything from how to make specific regions, what the scale of the campaign should be, how to make factions, how to make squads, what goals those squads and factions should have, how to make vehicles specific to those factions. Um, yeah, it has a lot of questions to ask yourself when developing them to help you flesh them out. Like, how corrupt are they? Or how much do they value their citizenry? You know? And so, yeah, there's lots of tools for GMs and players to help create their own campaign setting. And I the the rule book contains a campaign setting that I created, the continent of Izia, or the Isian conflict. And I'm honestly always surprised, though happy to hear it, when someone plays in that setting. Um, I only created it because people need examples for how these things will look when they create them themselves. And so that's why it exists. It's not to say I didn't put hard work into creating it and that I don't, you know, feel proud of it, but I always feel like people will get more out of Beam Saber if they create their own settings with their friends, but I can totally understand not wanting to do that work.
Mhm. Okay. So, hmm. My other question is like, I know that some of our yeah, some of Game Saver supplements or expansions, let's say, made by other people's. Because I saw some other names, but I'm gonna still ask it again. So, what kind of support do you offer for like players in terms of digital tools or third party license, or do you plan to let's say, to do some kind of crossovers with other games? I don't know. I'm just asking. So, what's on your
Mhm.
mind?
Um, so Beam Saber does have a third-party license. It's called the Beam Saber Supply Drop license, and it allows anyone who follows the guidelines within the license to release their own Beam Saber supplements and keep all of the profits from that supplement for themselves. I don't get any of the money if from people creating their own Beam Saber supplements. Um, and so there's a ton of third party material that people have created. Some of it, I would say the majority of them are playbooks for pilots and squads. There's a couple of settings out there, and there's even one resource package, which is very useful. We actually use it in CalazCon for downtime. Um, that one's called Cool Robot as an acronym. Um, and but the core rule book itself, it has character sheets available for printing in a PDF. There's reference sheets to print out that'll have like shortcuts for anything you might want to remember. My particular favorite thing in on the reference sheet is the consequences that GMs can inflict on players when their rolls don't go so well. Because sometimes even I forget the list of options. And there's more to having bad things happen to the players than just giving them wounds and causing them harm or damage. Um, there's digital clocks for tracking progress of objectives in play and goals and enemy health or consequences that are on the horizon. Um, so there's a number of resources that you get if you purchase Beam Saber. As for additional material I've created, I have put out a number of supplements. Um, and one campaign. The campaign is called Stardust Memento, and it's about playing resistance fighters in a conquered star system and taking one last desperate stab at the enemy in a way that you don't really think you can overthrow them at this point. This is about revenge. It's not about, you know, winning, so to
I
speak.
mean,
Um, And then the other supplements I've put out, there's a number of standalone supplements that are just single pilots playbook or squad playbooks, like the Recluse, which is inspired by John Wick and characters like him. You used to be a terrible, violent monster, and then you retired, and something has pulled you back in, and now violence is a tool of absolute last resort for you, which, obviously doesn't match the John Wick, movies, but is what I wanted to do thematically with that idea.
Mhm.
Um, or the show, which is a squad playbook, which turns your group of pilots into a theater company or a group of professional wrestlers.
Mhm.
Um, and where you try and make all of your missions as showy and extravagant as possible while still completing the objectives you've been hired for. Um, and then I've got uh, more broader supplements, like there's Rush Wars, which turns Beam Saber into a campaign more like the Fast and Furious movies or the Saints Row games. Um, I actually ran a campaign of that for some friends for about a year, and we had a lot of fun. Basically, being a terrible gang, just running amok in a city and fighting fake Tesla. Um, and then the last supplement that is coming to mind that I've put out is the Growing Conflict, which is sort of like the big, not quite sequel to Beam Saber. It contains 10 additional pilot playbooks, 5 additional squad playbooks, 2 new settings, and then also rules for creating your own faction as players. So if you decide that you want to secede from whatever group you're part of and stake your own nation, then the rules for doing that are in there and all the
Mhm.
complications and responsibilities that come with it.
Mhm. Hmm, that's really nice. So, was there any kind of feedback from playtesting sessions back then that significantly changed the direction of the game creation process?
Hmm. Um, yes, I was extremely fortunate in that I had a lot of playtester support. A number of the playtest groups were even willing to record their sessions for me to listen to afterwards. Um, one of the things, I mean, Works, as earlier mentioned, came out of playtesting. Before that, there was Fuel, which just worked identically to Stress, which is one of the reasons that all the vehicles felt very similar to each other. Um, But another thing that changed was Beam Saber got simpler through playtesting. Uh, an example of that is that originally there were 9 different resources for squads to track, and now there is just 2. There's personnel and there's
Mhm.
materiel, and there used to be 9, and I can't even remember all 9 of them at this point. But it was stuff like medical supplies, ammunition, fuel, uh, R&R supplies, armor might have been one of the supply types. I don't like I said, I can't remember all of them. There were too many, and, the need to cut it down came out of the play testing. Um, I am I'm a fan of thinking about a lot of my games have to do with how people relate to the organizations that surround them. And part of that is the logistics that happen between the two. And so that's why there were 9 resources originally, because it was like, what do you have access to and what don't you have access to? Does that affect the decisions that you make?
Mm, that really actually makes it a lot more interesting.
Yes, but unfortunately, it's also a lot more bookkeeping and cuts off a lot of options in the long run. Um,
Mhm, mhm.
so I, reduced it down from 9 to not 2 at first. There was more than 2 originally before that. And then it got down to 3. It was down to cash, personnel, and materiel. And then I realized that everything cash did could either be covered by personnel or material, except for one thing, which was that it affected the retirement package that pilots get. And that led to the previously discussed drive system was removing cash as a mechanic.
Mhm. Mhm. That's really nice. So, um, Okay, let's ask this one as well. So, like, wha- if you could go back and change one thing about the development process, what would it be?
About the process itself. Hmm.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, since you can change your mechanic anytime, but you cannot change the development process, that's why I'm asking that.
yeah, no, it's an interesting question. Um, I would say that I would come up with a style guide earlier for the game. Um, because that was something that created, it wasn't an issue so much at the time,
Mhm.
but when I was towards the end of the project and having to finalize a lot of stuff, that
Mhm.
there was a lot of problems, right? Because, like, the word pilot is used three different ways in the rule book
Okay.
because instead of saying player character or PC in the rules, I decided I would call them pilots, right?
Mhm.
And so those are the capital P pilots, is the player characters. But there are also NPCs that drive vehicles and mechs, and those are also pilots. Those are lowercase p pilots. And then there's also the fact that pilot is a verb, piloting. So that's another form that the word pilot takes in the rule book.
Mm.
So that has all been, through the magic of editing and hard work, that is all sorted out in the rule book. Each of those are, hopefully clear enough for the readers, but that's like one example. Or should which game mechanic terms should be capitalized, which are not capitalized, when should they be bolded, when should they not be bolded,
Mhm.
what fonts are you using for each of the different headers and subheaders. And so there's it, worked out in the end. Oh, what's your color scheme is another thing. Like, there's not a lot of colors in Beam Saber because the interior is black and white and all the art is black and white, but there's still a need for consistency across promotional material. And
Mhm.
so I would say that if anyone listening is making a tabletop role playing game and you think that it is getting beyond the work in progress stage and you think you might actually want to put it out in the public, then create a style guide and figure out what needs to be capitalized, what's not capitalized, what's italicized, what's bolded, what fonts are you using, what colors are you using, figure out an overall vibe and aesthetic for your game and create it and stick to it as early as possible. And you'll save yourself some headaches later on. And now that I say that, I'm thinking there are some games I'm working on that I should probably start thinking about style guides for so I don't do it again.
That's really, that's really nice. So, uh, okay. So what do you think? Like, okay, have you ever fallen into a pitfall when you played in this Beat Saber, or like? And also, as another question, like, what do you think are the most common pitfalls like new TTRPG content creators or classic creators and authors fall into? And like, how did you avoid them? Or we were related to that. What did you?
Um, I think that the most common pitfall is probably not working on your game consistently.
Mm,
Um, and that is a hard thing to overcome. Um, the the way I did it was I told myself that every day after work, I would sit down and I would write Beam Saber for an hour. I would focus on it as best I could. I wouldn't be looking at social media or other websites unless they were relevant to what I was looking at or what I was working on rather. And so I would work on it for an hour each day. If, you know, if that hour ended up not being very productive, that's fine. I can try again tomorrow. If it was very productive and after an hour I was still like in the zone, then I'd keep working until I was no longer in the zone, until I finished whatever particular thing that I was done with. And I think that that is the thing that most people, not just TTRPG designers struggle with is working on a hobby consistently. And so I think that, if your hobby of choice allows it, working on it for an hour every single day is a good way to make a lot of progress.
Mm, that's actually a pretty nice thing to say. I think you beginner, of course, like all of us, also has hard time and has tight schedules, so that makes sense. Okay. So I also like to talk about your other TTRPGs, but where to start? Let's say, okay, okay. So what I know is you got the best around and the long games, of course, the and also the age range Elfish creature heroes, the pack, and in the air tonight. That's what I know. And you also, oh, okay, let me check. Also, that the okay, targeting computer. Yeah, that's for BattleTech to facilitate our thing. Okay, yeah, and targeting code. So, which one would you like to start?
Um, why don't we start with In the Air Tonight? Because that uses the Spindlewheel deck that I mentioned previously. And so that is a two-player game, and
Hmm.
it's about partners who are on their way to do something ethically dubious and definitely dangerous.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's not so much about the climax of a story as it is about the moments leading up to the climax of a story. Um, it's called In the Air Tonight because it's inspired by a famous scene from the show Miami Vice from the pilot episode. Um, there's a scene where the two main characters are driving to do something,
Hmm.
and it's just extremely moody while um the song In the Air Tonight plays over top of it. Um and that's what inspired me to make it. It's very kind of strange to say. I've never watched the episode or the show. I've only seen that one scene, but left such a strong aesthetic impression on me that I had to make something to follow through on those vibes.
Hmm.
And so you ask questions while you're playing it, you know? Questions like what did you bring? And then you draw a spindle wheel card and you put that down and you answer the question. Or you don't need spindle wheel to play it though. You can just come up with ideas with your play partner.
Hmm.
And then you follow that up with, there's a bunch of questions and some of them are directly connected. For instance, the what did you bring question is connected with the question, and why should you not have brought it?
Hmm. So it may be of course, you can play it as a short session or a long session as well, because it's kind of a story game where you place the things and like a build a scene only, right? And then role play it. Okay, so that's actually pretty like a vibey game. I really
Yes. It's
vibe.
extremely vibey. And honestly, I don't it's also intended to be a fairly short game. I don't think that it has the legs to support more than 2 sessions, and I feel like if it hits 2 sessions, you're really going hard in the paint for role playing out the scenes, and also maybe got interrupted halfway through. Um, but I really like it. It creates some like really interesting moments between two characters who ostensibly trust each other, but are also doing something on their way to do something that they're struggling with. The thought about carrying it through for various reasons.
Hmm. So next one is the best round.
So the best around is my shot at making a game in an engine that I'm not particularly fond of.
Hmm.
Um, which is kind of a strange game design challenge to give myself, but sometimes these things happen. So it's a Firebrands framework game. So it's, based on Mobile Suit Zero Firebrands. Um, but it is themed around the idea of an anime style tournament arc. And originally it was called Tournament Arc. Um, but then I wanted to change the name because that is a little generic, and now I think that there's at least one other, possibly two other tabletop role playing games also called Tournament Arc. So I'm glad that I changed the name to the Best Around, um, which is that title comes from another song actually. Um, I think that song appears in the Karate Kid during a training montage. Um, and so that is a game where you create a character and well, it's multiple players. It's not just a two-player game. And each of you creates a character. It's GM-less, and you describe competitions that your characters do, and then the scenes surrounding those competitions as well. And so you do a a few scenes together, and that aren't about the competition itself. Maybe you sabotage one of the other competitors. Maybe you spend time together with one of the other competitors just talking and like being friends, or maybe you throw a party, or there's lots of different things. And so these sort of downtime scenes, I guess, help you build resources or move around resources. And then after a certain number of scenes have been played out, then you return to the competition and you compete and you can choose whether or not to spend the resources you've accrued during the downtime to try and help you win during the competition. And then after, a certain number of rounds of the competition, you see who has come out on top and who has won the tournament.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really nice. It has a reality show like Aurora, so that's really nice as well.
What? I had never thought about it, but you're absolutely right. It does have reality show vibes.
Mm-hmm. And the next one, let's say, the pack.
The pack that came out of another game design challenge that I set for myself. This was how simple can I possibly make a Forged in the Dark game? How minimalist can I make it without, uh, you know, sort of breaking it too much to a point where I wouldn't want to play it?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a dungeon crawling game where you don't have any actions, you don't have any abilities. All you have is the stuff in your pack. And so that's why it's called the pack, is because every item you have determines how many dice you roll. Because whenever you're faced with an obstacle, then the number of items that you have that you can apply to the situation is the number of dice that you roll. However, you can only carry so much, and some items also have special abilities. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like if I recall correctly, if you have an item that gives you a spell, then magic lets you get a certain benefit when you push yourself for extra dice. There's also familiar items, which you can, instead of rolling, you can guarantee that you get a 4, but that means that, you're guaranteed a consequence, but you're also guaranteed success. And instead of taking damage to your character, your items take damage. And so those can break and uh, you know, get into a state where they can't be used any longer. Uh, and so that's sort of it's about going through an extra dimensional dungeon, which is a sort of annual competition set up by the gods.
Uh,
I think it's I can't remember if it's every year or every 5 years or every 10 years, something like that. Maybe it's even every 100 years. Um, and so whoever gets through the extra dimensional maze first gets their wish granted.
yeah, it's every 100 years.
Yes. Thank you. Um, and so, it's about you competing with your group to get to the end of the maze as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also, you've got all these obstacles up before you. And then do you push on or do you choose to take downtime? Uh, and then delay yourself, and someone else might make more progress while you're resting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's nice as well. So, the next one is age range altered creature hero, MNT.
Yes. This is another. You're right. It's absolutely inspired by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Hmm.
Um, and it is also another design challenge for me because I wanted to create something in the vein of Honey Heist. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
back when, um, back when Itch was just starting to become popular as a tabletop role playing game storefront, Honey Heist was the highest rated and best selling game, was the hottest game on that for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the TTRPG design circles that I was in, there was a sort of achievement of can you beat the bear? And can you get placed higher on itch than Honey Heist? Um
It was Grand It's right. Like it's yeah, Grando's creations are good.
Yeah, and it's also available for free, and it's fun.
Yeah.
I've played it on stream. I did a one shot for I think a possibly a charity event. I don't recall. Um, and so my thought was, I want to make something that is of a similar vein to Honey Heist, right? Something that you randomly generate the characters, you randomly generate what the adventure is, and then you play it out, and it's simple enough that most people can play it without too much, you know, pre-planning, with too much thought ahead of time. Um, it's draws heavily from Saturday morning kids cartoons, and so it's just a very silly vibe, and so that's what it is. And so you randomly generate what all of your characters are at the start. What animal are you? What profession are you? And then it uses a grid-based system for your roles, for your stats. Um so your stats are, if I recall correctly, uh cowabunga, tubular, radical.
Yeah, it's idioms.
I don't remember the last one.
Not yeah, Nolly,
Gnarly, that's what it is. Uh,
Albonga, Radical, and Tubular. Yeah.
yeah, gnarly. And so each of those governs, like a certain aspect of play. And so you roll a number of dice based upon how many points you have in each of those. Um, but then as you fail rolls or things happen to your character, you have to move around the amount of points that are in each of those stats to the other stats or towards the other stats.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of like what you have instead of taking damage is your character's vibes change. And so it can become overconfident if you get too many points in one of those stats. And then your friends have to, do a very Saturday morning cartoon thing of being like, so this is why you're not the greatest ever. Um, or if you lose all your points in one of those stats, then your friends have to, give you a shoulder to lean on and be like, come on, you're not the worst person ever. You've got some good qualities to you too, and pull you back up onto your feet.
Mhm. Mhm. Hmm. So the next one, Tomb of the Gods.
Tomb
What
of
was
Gods was the first game I created after was the first game I published after Beam Saber. And that was um I wanted to make a game that had a PvP element. And so it's another game about granting your wish. And so the everyone in the party, you don't bother with the dungeon crawl or anything like that. It skips right to the final conflict with the immortal guardian of the tomb, who once they're defeated, they one person will get their wish granted um by the gods. However, only one of you gets your wish granted, and there's, presumably 3 or 4 of you playing the game. And so once the final dice roll happens, then a timer starts, and a real world timer, to be clear, not an in-game timer. You flip an hourglass, you start a stopwatch, and when that timer runs out, the immortal guardian revives and starts fighting you again. And so it will have to be defeated once more for you to get another shot at making your wish. But for a wish to be granted, everyone still alive has to agree on the wish that is granted. So you have a limited amount of time to convince all of the other players that they should agree to your wish. Or you can stab them in the back and kill them so that there's one fewer person who has to agree to your wish. But of course, if you don't do it fast enough, whether that's getting them to agree or killing everyone else, eh, the immortal guardian revives and you'll have to fight it again. And so the game goes until either everyone agrees to your wish. And of course, if you're the only one left alive, then you're the only one who needs to agree to it, or everyone dies horribly trying to kill each other and or the immortal guardian gets them.
perfect? So, and the next one, it's older than 5 or 6 years. So it's Alone in the House. A based on the Alone games by Takumoda Okada. Yeah.
Yes. So it's an alone game. Um, using the system created by Takuma Okada, who's a friend of mine. And the system uses a combination of dice and playing cards to determine what happens. In Alone in the House, it is a game. It's a single player horror game about being alone in your home in the dark. And you've been having strange dreams. Although the more they happen, the less sure you are that they are dreams. You see strange things happening in your home while you're alone, and your sureness of what reality is begins to become difficult to discern. And so it's a journaling game. So the idea is you make the room as dark as possible when you're playing it alone. And then you roll some dice and you draw a card and you reference tables to see what those results, tell you about what strange things you've seen. And then you write a journal entry about your experience having observed those strange phenomena within your home.
It's kind of like a primitive horror game where it really is scary. So I can understand that.
Yeah, I've seen some people who've actually played it and they've, felt that it, properly evoked the vibes that I was going for. So that's all I wanted.
Mhm. And the last one for me is targeting computer, a system for using battle tech to facilitate role play?
Yeah.
Does it fall?
Um, so I am, as unsurprisingly, a big fan of mecha stuff, and that includes BattleTech, of which I am also a particularly big fan of. I play the tabletop game with the miniatures and such. But before that, I played the computer game from 2018 by Harebrained Schemes, which is an excellent tactics game about controlling mechs. And so targeting computer was a system I came up with to, I guess, in a sense, it's a bit of a LARP using Discord and the Harebrained Schemes Battletech game to role play as mech warriors with your friends. And so it's a set of instructions available for free because I didn't want to risk the ire of IP lawyers by charging money for it. Where one person hosts a game of Battletech and everyone else hops in a Discord call and you pretend to be the mech warriors who are piloting the mechs during the missions. And so each character has a role within the mercenary company that you're part of. You know, some of them are commanders. And so you make decisions about what missions to take and where to go next. Some are quartermasters, and so they decide what should be bought and what should be sold. And the last are engineers, and they decide what parts and weapons should be put onto the different mechs that you have. And so you do those between missions. And then when you go on missions, you pick some of those characters to come on the mission. And then do your mission. And hopefully you all get out alive, but some of you might die if things go real sideways during one of the missions, as they sometimes do. When I did a year long ish campaign of it with some friends, um, and I think there was like 3 or 4 character deaths during play because sometimes just things go wrong or um in one particular moment that really stands out for me was uh a friend my friend Hadrian, his first character had just died. And so he created a new character called Kickflip, whose call sign was Kickflip for his second character. And on the first mission that Kickflip went on, she ended up sort of like isolated, strung out alone a bit in her mech, and, uh, he kept asking for, like, the other characters to come and, like, provide him backup, uh, because the mech his character was in was, like, kind of a sniper mech, if I recall correctly. For anyone who knows Battletech, it was a blackjack, um, and the other characters just did not provide that support. They were focused on fighting something else that probably could have been handled by, 1 or 2 of them, but instead all 3 of them were focusing on it. And in the end, Kickflip got killed on her very first mission because, she didn't get the support she needed because everyone was doing other stuff. And so that's like a particular role playing moment from that game that stands out to me.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Okay, before my last question, I would like to ask you, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I guess the one thing I would add is that if you like actual play, please check out CalazCon. That's CalazCon. You can find it in whatever podcast app you use. It's also available on YouTube because it was recorded with video. So you can watch the players play on YouTube instead and see it
Put
all
all the links down below.
and see all of the character and mech art that gets used in the game because there's some wonderful art that we commissioned for it by Ben Fluter. Um, so yeah, and CalazCon, check it out. It's a very experimental actual play. nothing else like it with 30 players across 6 different play groups. Um,
Mhm.
with one play group, well, 5 of the play groups play a traditional Beam Saber campaign with missions and downtime, and the 6th play group play the legislature, the government body that controls the government that the other players are part of. And so they
Mhm.
wrote on the missions that will come up in the next set of episodes afterwards. And each of the players in the legislature represents one of the squads who are doing the missions. So they are pursuing their squad's goals as well as their own personal goals as they play. And because all of the squads are participating in the same front of the war in a occupied city called Hestiel, there's a lot of interconnectedness. NPCs appear between different groups, will get created in one group and then become a major character in a different group. And so it's a really interesting actual play experience.
Mhm. Hmm. Okay, so I'm gonna put all the links down below. So also please send me those links so I can just put it up on spell. Uh, so my last question is, what is your secret sauce, tips and tricks when you creating your own TTRPGs? Well, so what's your magic? What's your trick behind of it?
So my trick for game design is the way that I take notes. So I make bulleted lists, right? I sometimes a game starts off with a single idea. Um and so I have a bulleted list of all the ideas that I have. It's just a big long undifferentiated list of bullet points of notes.
Mhm.
And then I ask questions in sub bullets about those notes, right? So, say for instance, I was making a game about the adventures of lamplighters in a gas punk city, right? So the first question might be, so I might say, at the very top, the player characters are lamplighters. So then I would, in a follow up note to that, in a sub bullet to that bullet, I would ask, why are lamplighters exciting enough to have adventures told about them? And so then I answer that question in a sub bullet to that sub bullet. And so, the answer might be, right, like, Um, well, there are monsters that lurk in the dark. And so, you know, it's being a lamplighter is a necessary but dangerous job.
Yeah.
And so then, that's that question answered. And so that gives me a new idea of like, okay, there are monsters in the dark. So then I create a new bullet of like, all right, we need mechanics for the monsters and we need mechanics for the darkness. So then I ask questions about those bullet points. And so, but usually the ideation process is not quite so directed. Usually I'll just have a bunch of different ideas kicking around, inspired by something I've seen recently or read or what have you, maybe a dream I had. Um, because sometimes my games and mechanics come out of dreams that I have. Um, And so it's just a matter of like, have an idea, ask a question about that idea, answer that question, and then that answer will inspire new ideas or new questions, which then need answers of their own. And so you just continue this dialogue with yourself and in your notes, and you keep all of the questions and all of the answers and all of the notes because you never know when you're going to need to come back to them, even if you think you've discarded an idea. And
Mhm.
so once all of these notes get filled out quite a bit, then I start to differentiate and reorganize them. Here's all the notes, questions, and answers that are about the player characters. Here's all the notes, questions, and answers about the world, the mechanics, character creation, and so forth. And that helps to organize it into a more comprehensible document, right?
Mhm.
Once you have all those notes down, I also keep a section for rejected ideas. or anything I don't think I want anymore goes in there in case I need it later. Um, Once you get all your notes organized, then you can start writing out in prose what these notes mean. Because, a note for yourself can be really simple, short form because you remember what inspired the idea, or, your brain can work its way back to where the idea came from.
Mhm.
But if the other people are going to read it, then you need to have prose for them to be able to understand what you were aiming for because you're not necessarily there to fill in the blanks. So, it goes questions or notes, questions, answers, organization, prose. And then once you've got prose for all of your notes, you've written a game basically. And then it's just time to play test.
Mhm. Mhm. That was really a nice one because I think that writing is the first thing that everyone that had to do, and the thing that the people are not doing is also writing part. So we tend to like forfeit and stuff like that, but writing is the crucial. And also, okay, so also, let's say thank you for joining this session with me. And I was that was a really nice session, and that really sparked my imagination to creating other my own TTRPGs as well. So especially your designs are they're really lovely. So and they, I mean it. So when I read it, I just can see the hard work behind of it, and the mechanics as well. So in this hobby, I believe we should of course respect and also help as much as we can to the content creators.
Absolutely.
And if we can help them, I mean, you folks, you are watchers, readers. If you can help them, they can create more other amazing contents. And also, if you even don't like their projects, if you help them, they can come up with something that you may like because they are the game designers, and you can be one, of course, a game designer. I mean, but if nobody is helping, like anyone in this community, so you won't be successful as well. So help the market and keep yourself a gain as well. So,
Hmm.
I'm gonna put the links below to you to, of course, download the games, buy the games, and you also have physical copies as well, right?
For being a Saber, yes, you can get physical copies through Indie Press Revolution. That's where you can buy those, or you can also get print on demand through Drive Through RPG. But I recommend the Indie Press Revolution instead.
Hmm. And I always admire the paperwork. That feels always the most like the nice one. So try to buy the physical one. Well, you can buy the digital as well.
Yes, both work plenty well.
So I also really thank you for joining the session with me for the Tavern Talks. So mhm,
Yes, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
no problem. And hopefully, on your next creations, we may talk again, and hopefully there will be a lot of like fundraising events for you. I don't know. We're waiting for it. So so see you, folks.
Bye.